speaker of real renown and reputation, Rifat Bali, who's somebody whose scholarship is known, and it's a real honor that he's here. Charles Small will give you an introduction, but I'm sure it's going to be very brief because it's not going to be. Mr. Bali speaks Ladino, I understand, which is really quite especially since that's what the native tongue of my dad.
Lectures in English, right?
Pardon?
We have simultaneous.
The lecture will be Latino as well. Anyway, Charles, you can shoot.
I'm going to do the translation. So before I introduce Rifat, so this is the last seminar. I really want to thank Joel and Doron very much for putting on these seminars of dealing with anti-Semitism. As you know, I am the director of ISGAP. I also would like to thank Gina and Jenny, who put a lot of effort and work into putting on these seminars, these regular seminars. And I'm especially grateful to Doron and Joel, because I basically came to them when I was sort of literally on the street. And Fordham, under Joel and Doron's assistance, was the first place to allow us to do seminars. We subsequently, having our foot back in the academy, we're doing events at the Harvard Law School, McGill, and Stanford. We're now expanding to UCLA and the University of Miami, and I actually, as of Monday, I'm able to confirm that there's a group of scholars creating ISGAP Italia at a very good university in Italy. So we're beginning to have traction, and I think Doron and Joel really played a very important role, because they spoke to me when not too many people wanted to talk to me just after our demise at Yale. So I'm especially grateful. And as Doron said, we're very fortunate to have a renowned scholar, Rifat Bali. Rifat is an independent scholar specializing in the history of Turkish Jewry. He's a graduate from École Pratique des Hautes Études, the EPHE of Paris, and he's an associate member of the Alberto Benvenisti Center for Sephardic Studies and Social Cultural History of the Jews at the CNRS at the Sorbonne University of Paris. He is the winner of the Alberto Benvenisti Research Award from 2009 for his publications on Turkish Jewry and of the Yunus Nadi Istanbul 2005, and in 2008 awards for his research in social sciences. His latest book is entitled Model Citizens of the State, the Jews of Turkey During the Multi-Party Period, has been published by the Fairleigh Dickinson University Press in 2012. He's currently the managing director of Libra Books in Istanbul, Istanbul, Turkey. Libra Books is a small academic press specializing in Turkish studies and a service house supplying of foreign libraries with their publication and their publication needs in the field of the Ottoman Empire, Ottoman studies, and Turkish studies. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank all of you who came here and gave your time. And the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy, its director, Charles Small, the Fordham University faculty who convened this, Gina, who made all the travel arrangements and so on.
Can you speak louder?
Okay.
Or closer?
All right. So the lecture is, as the title says, is the roots of Turkish antisemitism and its themes. Turkey is very much in the news nowadays after the state of Israel apologized. And anti-Semitism in Turkey is a subject which has not really been studied locally in Turkey and also internationally. It's a marginal subject, and it's very much subject to the fluctuation of the relations between Turkey and Israel. When the relations are good, the subject is never on the news. When the relations are bad, you see, not all the time, but from time to time, that people, officers from the state of Israel are complaining, but not too much loudly, because they expect that the relations will be smoother, so there is no need to put another black problem on the table. So the point of my lecture is that I will try to prove you because there is a widespread conviction abroad that, well, there is not really anti-Semitism in Turkey, but and even if it is, if there is, it's marginal and it's subject, as I said, to what's going on in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine. So my lecture will try to point out that there is what I call a Turkish antisemitism relevant to Turkey. What are the themes, the reasons, the situation after our current government, the Islamist Justice and Development Party, won the elections in the year 2002, and how the Turkish society, how the Turkish intellectuals are really reacting to this situation. And there will be a small postscriptum, it's not a second lecture, but a small postscriptum, which is a few slides for those of you who wonder what was the Turkish perception of the Israeli apology. Okay. So, a widespread opinion in Turkey among politicians, social commentators, and the Turkish public is that anti-Semitism is an ideology that was created within the Christian world, but not encountered in Turkey. One of the classical arguments frequently repeated by Islamist intellectuals is that anti-Semitism is a sin from the Islamist point of view. Of course, for the Islamist, a good Jew is not a Zionist, whereas a bad Jew is one by definition. And this assessment is valid for all Jews, whether they are living in Turkey or abroad, or in the state of Israel. Thus, in such circles, one can publish all manner of insult and calumny against bad Jews and not consider one itself as an anti-Semite and not be considered as an anti-Semite by others. Another argument that is often added on this one is that anti-Semitism is a phenomenon and ideology foreign to Turkey, since both the Ottoman Empire and the successor, the Turkish Republic, have historically shown great tolerance towards their Jewish minority. For these reasons, there is a readily observable phenomenon in Turkey wherein everybody, publicists, intellectual opinion leaders from all parts of the society, different ideologies, who never agree on anything else, all seem to agree on this topic and readily claim that the continued Ottoman and Turkish tolerance and benevolent treatment towards the Jews exist before, today, and forever. Nevertheless, scholarly research has appeared in recent years that would belie this notion of tolerance towards the Jews, showing it to be largely a myth constructed for the purpose of public relations in countering the recognition of the Armenian genocide originating from the United States and Europe. Although this may change in time, at present this historical revision did not make any influence outside of academic circles, and both the Turkish public and official people continue to mouth and believe that the official line of Turkish tolerance and the non-existence of anti-Semitism is a real one. More troubling than the fact that these revisionist arguments are not being accepted is the fact that the claim of continued tolerance is simply untrue. Anti-Semitism has manifested itself in various forms among the Turkish polity and ruling classes ever since the very beginning of the Turkish Republic in 1923. After its establishment in 1923 and until the end of the one-party rule in 1946, anti-Semitism was repeatedly expressed within the Turkish press and among the Kemalist intelligentsia through various campaigns, ranging from accusations that the country's Jews were resisting assimilation into Turkish society to claims that they were controlling or exploiting the Turkish economy. From 1946 onwards, Turkey stepped into real democracy with a multi-party system, and the Islamism, which was repressed during the one-party rule between 1923 and 1946, resurfaced within the new democratic atmosphere, and parallel to this, the anti-Semitism encountered during the previous 2 decades among Kemalists transformed itself and embraced a new range of themes. So the question is there really such a thing as a Turkish anti-Semitism? we should consider the concept of Turkish antisemitism. When the question is asked whether antisemitism exists in Turkey, those arguing against its existence tend to claim that, one, if there is antisemitism in Turkey, it tends to be marginal, and two, in any case, it's a foreign ideology introduced from the West that has never really been accepted into Turkish society. Although this claim is partially correct as a whole, it is simply wrong. It is correct that a great many aspects of Turkish antisemitism are imports. However, it is equally true that there is no lack of local themes, and it is due to these local themes, not foreign elements, not imports, that antisemitism is so widespread in Turkey, especially within the Islamist and ultranationalists. So now let's have a look to the foreign themes. The most significant of the foreign import to enter Turkish antisemitism is without a doubt the various translations of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Between 1923, the establishment of the Turkish Republic, until today, there have been 113 printings of Turkish translation of this anti-Semitic classic. 68% have been published by Islamists, 19% by nationalist publishing houses or newspapers. In addition to the protocols, the theme of the Jewish world domination is prevalent throughout the publications of the Islamists and nationalists. Among the variations on this theme that one encounters are the following ones which we are seeing. The ultimate goal of Zionism is a greater Israel that stretches from the Nile to the Euphrates, and the Euphrates is within the Anatolian continent. So this widespread belief is based on the biblical verses from the Genesis, which says that in the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, "Unto your descendants have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates." So the Turks believe that the greater Israel is threatening Turkey. Freemasonry is simply a tool used by Zionism and Jewry to achieve their goal of world domination. The Lions, the Rotary Club, and the Bilderberg Group are all organizations under the control of the Jews. Communism and capitalism are Jewish ideologies. The father of Marxism, Marx, was a Jew, and the Jews played a major role in the Bolshevik Revolution, proof that communism is a Jewish ideology. Wall Street, Hollywood, and the American media are all in the hand of the Jews. Among the aforementioned themes, the recurring figures of Freemasonry, the communist, and the Jew served during the 60s and 70s as the three principal enemies of the Islamists and nationalists in Turkey. With the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, the persistent theme of communism as a Jewish invention began to disappear from the discourse of Turkish rightist circles. Nevertheless, the talk of Freemasonry as a Jewish tool and the Jewish control of Wall Street, Hollywood, and the American media have continued, along with other variations on the Jewish world domination theme. For example, during the presidency of George W. Bush, the claim was repeated in the Turkish press and elsewhere that the Jewish so-called neocons had taken control of the White House and were actually attempting to steer US foreign policy in the direction of Israel's interests. Local themes. When we speak about local themes, I'm referring to those themes that are unique to the Turkish experience. Almost all of these themes tend to use as their starting point the widespread but wrong conviction on the role of some Jewish personalities in three major events in Turkey in Turkish recent history. A, the fall and breaking up of the Ottoman Empire. B, the establishment of the Republic of Turkey. And C, Atatürk, the founding father of the modern Turkey. Atatürk's large-scale radical social engineering project within the new republic established, including its secularization. So the first theme is the deposition of Sultan Abdülhamid, the last Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, which is considered as a Jewish plot. This widespread conviction is based on a conspiracy theory that I can summarize as follows. Theodor Herzl paid a visit to Sultan Abdülhamid, which is a fact, in order to request from him property in Ottoman Palestine for Jewish settlement in exchange for arranging wealthy European Jews to pay off the Ottoman public debt. When the Sultan refused, until this point it's true, yes, and the Sultan refused. When the Sultan refused, the belief is that the Zionists and the Dönmez is a Turkish term meaning convert, and it means crypto-Jews, the followers of Shabtai Sevi, the Messiah, or the rabbi of the mid-1600s, which was born in Izmir and called himself as the Messiah. Shabtai Sevi, as you probably know, then converted to Islam under the threat of the Sultan, who challenged him to make a miracle, otherwise he would be killed, and then he converted to Islam but secretly practiced Judaism, and all his followers converted also to Islam and secretly practiced Judaism, and these people are called Dönmez or Sectarians. So when the Sultan refused the Zionists and the Dönmez, referred as Sabbateans or crypto-Jews, these people conspired to take their revenge, the Dönmez and the Zionists, doing so by means of the Revolutionary Committee of Union and Progress, in which they had great influence. A proof of this claim is that there was a 4-person delegation sent to inform the Sultan of his deposition, and among them a parliamentary deputy for Salonika, Emanuel Carasso. And the Sultan was exiled for house arrest to Salonika in the villa of a Jewish banking family, Alatini, in the predominantly Jewish city of Salonika. So according to this conspiracy theory, Herzl's revenge didn't end there. The Sultan was deposed, he was sent into exile into a Jewish city, into a Jewish banker's villa, but the revenge didn't end there. The Islamist circles are also generally convinced that Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founding father of the Turkish Republic, was a Dönme, a crypto-Jew himself, and behind his abolition of the Ottoman Caliphate and transformation of the remains of the Ottoman Empire into a secular Turkish Republic lay his desire to take the revenge on the Muslim Turks for Herzl's refusal. As a result, the Islamists often refer to the Republic of Turkey as the second Jewish state in the Middle East. So from where comes this belief that Mustafa Kemal was a Dönme, which is not true, of course? There are a number of reasons that the Islamist public in Turkey believe Mustafa Kemal to have been a Dönme. First of all, because he was born in Salonika, the Jerusalem of the Balkan, and that he received much of his early education in Salonika at Dönme schools and under Dönme teachers. Another factor that has gone some way towards strengthening this conviction is the appearance of an article in 1994 in the Jewish American newspaper Forward by Hillel Halkin. At that time, the Israeli President Ezer Weizmann was on the brink to pay a state visit to Turkey in 1994, and Halkin, in his article that he published in Forward, made reference to the recollections of the Israeli journalist Itamar Ben-Avi, the son of the father of modern Hebrew, Eliezer ben Yehuda. And Itamar Ben-Avi, who published in Hebrew his recollections in 1961, claims that he had met Mustafa Kemal in Jerusalem in the years 1910s, and that Mustafa Kemal allegedly confessed to him that he was of Jewish origin. So this article was published in 1961. Nobody knew Hebrew and they could not read. When in 1994, 33 years later, it was Hillel Halkin made a summary and published in Forward, the Turkish public became aware, the Islamists. Halkin reminded President Weizmann, and he believed so, the reporter, that the founding father of modern Turkey that he would soon visit, and its first president was in fact a Jew. These recollections of Itamar Ben-Avi came forward 33 years after, and the Turkish public quickly embraced by the Islamists as a positive proof that Atatürk was indeed a Dönme. Apart from Atatürk, there are two other personalities which you see the photographs, which in Islamist popular belief, played an influential role in the establishment of the Republic of Turkey as a secular state. The first one is the Rabbi Haim Nahum, the last chief rabbi of the Ottoman period. And the other one is Moise Cohen, a Turkish Jewish intellectual who Turkified its name to Tekinal and was a fervent Kemalist and secularist. In popular Islamist circles, there is a widespread belief that Haim Nahum, who served on the Turkish delegation to the Lausanne Peace Conference in the capacity of an advisor, was the one who originally convinced the Turkish delegation head to abolish the caliphate. The same public which holds this view tends to hold Tekinal Moise Cohen as an object of loathing, both because of his Kemalist orientation and because he titled one chapter of his 1936 book Kemalism, "To Hell with the Sharia." He was an ardent Turkish nationalist, but today Turkish nationalist circles largely reject the credentials of Tekinal as a true Turk due to his Jewish origins, while the Islamists see him as a Jew who, by hiding behind a Turkish name, spread the seeds of nationalism into the Turkish intellectual world and thus opens the way for the destruction of the Ottoman Empire. In short, the Jews are the people who are primarily responsible for the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The conclusion is that they are also the obstacle to the Islamization of Turkey today, basing themselves on the popular belief that Atatürk was a dönme and that he was supported by key Turkish Jewish figures in imposing secularism. Turkish Islamists and nationalists tend to hold both Jews and dönmes as the central object of their hatred, seeing them as enemies of the Sharia law, as well as responsible for the destruction of the Ottoman Empire, the forcible top-down imposition of the country's secular orders, and thus the founders of the Jewish Republic of Turkey. From the Islamist viewpoint, the dönmes have traditionally occupied the key positions in Turkish society, and thus are, until recently, the only remaining obstacle to transforming the current Republic of Turkey into the Islamic Republic of Turkey. For them, the Jew represents much more than just a small religious minority. Instead, their power and evil intentions assume mythic proportions. They are seen as a type of deadly virus possessing near demonic qualities and capabilities. And this human pestilence, whether in its open Jewish form or disguised as Muslims as the dönmes do, works to gain the trust of Muslims so that it may more easily infiltrate Islam and Turkish society in order to corrupt and weaken it. For the Islamists, the Jew was not simply the planner and agent of all manner of calamity and conspiracy to weaken and destroy the Ottoman Empire, but the true source of all evil that befell it over the long century of the existence of the empire. Let's now sit to the situation since the ascent of the Justice and Development Party. During the period of this so-called Refah Yol ruling coalition, which was between this government in between June 1996 and June 1997, it was a coalition between the Islamist Welfare Party, presided by Necmettin Erbakan, and the secular center-right Rifat Party. Erbakan became Turkey's prime minister the first time the post was held by an Islamist politician. Turkey's traditionally secular and military-dominated National Security Council delivered an ultimatum to the Prime Minister Erbakan on February 28, 1997, stating that in light of the recent increase in Islamist activity within the country and the irresolute response of the current government, Erbakan had to implement the Council recommendation in order to stop this trend. After a couple months of ineffective maneuvering to save the coalition, the Prime Minister was ultimately forced to announce its dissolution and watch his place be taken by a new center-right liberal coalition. The process, which began by this ultimatum of February 28, 1997 from the National Security Council decision and ending with the government's fall at the end of June, has come to be known as Turkey's first postmodern coup, because Turkey has a tradition of military coups, but it was real military coups. This is a postmodern coup where the militaries really didn't roll tanks in the streets. Nevertheless, this restoration of the secular and Kemalist order proved itself to be short-lived, as only 5 years later, and in the face of ever-growing popularity, the Justice and Development Party, touting a new, more moderate brand of political Islam, swept into power by a great majority in Turkey's 2002 national elections. And this victory would ultimately prove to be just the beginning of a tectonic shift in Turkish political life. Unlike any of its predecessors, the Justice and Development Party was the first Islamist party in Turkey's history to enjoy significant support from the libertarian left and social economic liberals, both of which had long resented the repressive and authoritarian behavior of the old guard Kemalists and the military brass. Even more significant than their electoral victory, the new regime claimed, the Justice Development Party claimed to uncover a widespread coup plots among the Kemalist military brass and Kemalist journalists, known by the code names of Ergenekon and Sledgehammer. So most of these people today are being prosecuted. Some have been convicted for long-term prisons, and they are ex-generals and military brass. Surprisingly, perhaps, this settling of accounts by the Justice and Development Party regime has also given rise to a number of new anti-Semitic attempts. Turkish Islamist media blames that Israel and the Jewish neocons, who were seen to be the agents influencing policy for the postmodern coup of 1997. Lying behind this claim is the belief that the top brass of the Turkish armed forces, who are one of the key actors in Turkey's Kemalist order until recently, the chief defenders and guarantors of the secular Turkish Republic, are all either dönmez or friends and supporters of Israel. So this is the headlines of a major Islamist newspaper, the top brass which are today being prosecuted, and the title says they served Israel. In many ways, this is simply the more recent extension of the conviction that Mustafa Kemal's abolition of the caliphate and the subsequent secular reforms derived from the fact that he was a dönme. A number of circumstances and events have been picked up by the Islamist press as the evidence of collusion between the Turkish High Command, the State of Israel, and the Jewish neocons in Washington. Among this is Jewish sons-in-laws. First of all, the son-in-law of the ex-first army commander, General Çetin Doğan, who has been prosecuted and condemned, I think, to 20 years of prison for plotting a military coup against the present government. His son-in-law is Harvard professor Dani Rodrik, an Istanbul-born Turkish Jew. That's another headline. Which says the same thing. The Jewish sons-in-law of the here you see Dani Rodrik again, and another faculty, Turkish faculty here at New York.
And what is it they're saying?
They are saying that the Jewish, all these top brass have Jewish sons-in-laws who have supported them, and somehow were the interface between the Jewish neocons in Washington and the State of Israel and so on. And they were the people who were plotting to throw out the present government.
What is the newspaper that this is in?
It's called Akit or Vakit. People say that it's a marginal newspaper. If you look to the number of circulation, it's not a marginal newspaper. It has about 50,000 circulation. You have many liberal leftist newspapers which have the same number of circulation. Then immediately after General Yaşar Büyükanıt, a former chief of staff, was elevated to the post of commander of the Turkish armed forces, where he served between the years 2006 and 2008, there were systematic reports in the press that he was actually of Dönme extraction as well. Then you have his successor. He is also in prison and being prosecuted again for trying to overthrow the present government. He is retired General İlker Başbuğ. At that time he was chief of staff. Praying at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, and it was again published by the same newspaper. And you have also a hardline secularist general and former deputy chief of staff, Çevik Bir, who has been arrested, who displayed an uncompromising attitude towards the Islamists during the 1997 postmodern coup, and he was an ardent and outspoken proponent of closer economic and military ties between Turkey and Israel. And the people who believe that he was among the people who tried to plot with the Jewish neocons to overthrow the government, use this article that Çevik Bir published some 11 years ago in the Middle East Quarterly. They say that's the smoking gun. More interesting, perhaps, is that some of the leading liberal and leftist and intellectuals today in Turkey have also embraced this opinion. Cengiz Çandar, a name which is very well known here in Washington, D.C. among Turkish, those people who follow Turkish, a liberal columnist for the center-left daily Radikal, has claimed that Israel and its Washington lobby were behind the postmodern coup of 1997. Then you have another professor, a leftist liberal professor of a prestigious university in Istanbul, the Sabancı University, and a columnist at a center-left daily, who confirms that Çandar's claim are true by speculating that, and I am quoting, the belligerence of the Israeli lobby is so great that it engaged in efforts to destroy the most esteemed professional institutions, and that Bernard Lewis and his allies established the Academic Forum on the Middle East, ASMEA, as an alternative to MESA, Middle East Studies Association, reminding his readers that the aforementioned Turkish General Çevik Bir was one of the founders of this new organization, ASMEA. In addition, this professor referred to Bernard Lewis as an unbending Atatürkist, an ally of the Turkish nationalist militarist nation state, and concluded that his colleague Çandar's declaration that the Jewish lobby supported this postmodern coup was a story showing the type of attire that the collaboration between Turkish Atatürkist coup planners on one hand and the State of Israel and the Israeli lobby on the other will drop itself, all in the name of preserving secularism in the Middle East. Now let's look to the attitude of Turkey's intelligentsia to this problem of anti-Semitism. Turkey's intelligentsia can be divided into 6 main currents: leftist, liberals, Kemalist, neo-nationalist, nationalist, and Islamist. The Kemalist intellectuals, which is the followers of the founding father of Atatürk, have over recent decades been most exorcised by what they perceive as a continued erosion of secularism in the Turkish society and the constant weakening of Atatürk's principle, which is true. As such, the question of Turkish anti-Semitism is not an issue that overly excites or interests them. Regarding the other currents, Islamist, neo-nationalist, and nationalist, which is where anti-Semitism is most widespread, and where, ironically, the question of anti-Semitism in Turkey is most frequently rejected out of hand and certainly never brought up for discussions. The leftists and liberals. The leftists and the liberals tend to be the most sensitive toward hate speech in the media and prejudices toward Turkey's minorities. But even this sensitivity is a relatively recent development and has arisen in reaction to a series of high-profile murders that took place in Turkey in the last years. The first of these murders was the killing of a Roman Catholic priest on February 2006. Then the murder of a well-known editor of a Turkish Armenian weekly, Agos, Hrant Dink, who was murdered on January 2007. 3 months later, after this second murder, 2 Turkish converts to Protestant Christianity and a German national, all employees of a Bible publishing houses, were murdered again. As a result of this series of shocking murders, the leftist and liberal circles began to make public condemnations of the racism and hate speech against minorities, gays and Kurds found in the media, and declaring their own sensitivity on these issues. The same circles have also recently begun to include anti-Semitism under the heading of hate speech and racism and condemn it as such. Yet, while doing this, these groups have preferred to target the old guard Kemalists and ultra-nationalists, in the process largely giving the Islamists a pass, despite the fact that Islamist intellectuals, politicians and press have for decades been the leading propagators of anti-Semitic speech. And this is still true today. Why is that so? The unconcerned attitude toward anti-Semitism on the part of the leftist and liberal circles derives from several different sources. The first is that these circles both arose, at least in part, in opposition to the anti-democratic and dictatorial aspects to the Kemalist regime and its principal defenders, the Turkish armed forces. Many of the older liberal publicists and intellectuals in Turkey today were arrested as a part of the large-scale roundups performed by the military regime after the September 1980 military coup, while others experienced similar pressures during the postmodern coup of 1997. For this reason, many of them have a certain amount of sympathy with their Islamist counterparts, who before the electoral victory of the Justice and Development Party in 2002 were also subject to heavy pressure under the Kemalist order and at the hand of the Turkish armed forces. In these struggles against what is seen as an anti-democratic regime, the Islamists could be portrayed as brothers in arms of the leftists and liberals. The irony, however, is that because of this rapprochement, the leftists and liberals preferred not to be bothered with a slight detail, the anti-Semitic rhetoric of some of their allies, since they were fighting for a greater cause, the democratization of Turkey. Nor is this a situation peculiar only to those on the liberal or left. It is now politically correct and a proof of coexistence, democracy and pluralism, to either invite Islamist publicists and intellectuals, most of whom have been propagating anti-Semitism in their writings, to mainstream television debate programs, or to encounter their names among the columnists of mainstream newspapers. As a result of all this development, we have today arrived at the point that some of the Islamist columnists who have for years poisoned the minds of their readers with anti-Semitic writings and conspiracy theories about Israel and world Jewry are now perceived in the Turkish society as respectable public intellectuals. The second reason for the lack of enthusiasm among Turkish leftists and liberals to confront anti-Semitism are their problematic relationship with the State of Israel and with Zionism in general. Historically, Turkish leftists have been pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli in their attitude. Since the rise of radical left students group in Turkey in the second half of the 60s and in the 70s, a good number of leftist Turkish student leaders began to travel to PLO camps in Lebanon to receive education and training for realizing their own revolution in Turkey, some even losing their lives in attacks or counterattacks by Israelis. In fact, on the subjects of Israel and Zionism, there is a great deal of overlap between the views of the liberal left and the Islamists. With few of exception, all these groups tend to see the State of Israel as a colonialist, expansionist state occupying Palestinian lands. They also believe that Israel and its supporters consistently use the accusation of anti-Semitism to stifle its critics and criticism of Israel. In light of these factors, it becomes maybe easier to understand why the issue of anti-Semitism in Turkey has found so little resonance among the country's liberals and leftists. That's in conclusion. Before this scene of persistent apathy from all parts of the Turkish establishment and Turkish society, in the face of persistent anti-Semitism, the first question that comes to mind for many is how can Turkish Jewish community continue to live securely in their own country? Turkish Jewish leadership often feel obliged to make public declaration to the effect that they are Turks, and while they may admit to an emotional connection with Israel, one will never hear the word Zionism spoken in public. If we can recall to what extent the terms Israel and Zionism are demonized within Turkish society, we can more easily understand the narrow and difficult choices faced by the community's leaders. Were they to behave differently, in other words, if they were to publicly express pro-Israel or quote-unquote Zionist opinion, they would undoubtedly be subjecting themselves to the open hostility and rage of the Islamists. As individuals, as an institution, and as a community in general, and judging from recent history, this would represent a very real threat to its continued existence. To put this in more concrete terms, let me give you the following example. After one of the plotters of the November 15 and November 20, 2003 attacks against two synagogues in Istanbul and the headquarters of the HSBC Bank and the British consulate in Istanbul, one of the plotters was arrested, and then later on he sent to the court a long letter where he explained the rationale of what was behind the suicidal attacks. And I'm quoting from his letter. "Tell me, while we Muslims of Turkey condemn and curse the cruelties that Israel inflicts upon the Palestinians, have you ever heard a similar statement and criticism from a Jew born and raised in these Turkish lands?" After the events of September 11 and 15-20 November 2003, which is the attacks in Istanbul, even after the suicide attacks in Palestine, which many Islamic institutions and religious personalities mentioned as terror, did you ever even hear one statement from the Turkish Jewish community and its leader condemning and naming the attacks that Israel has inflicted upon Palestine and that the world also condemned as terror? We thus concluded that the synagogues in Turkey were actually places that serve the Jewish state of Israel. That the fact that Israeli statesmen who come to Turkey visited these places and have lectured there has strengthened our opinion. We saw such a target as a suitable payback for Israel's action, as a way of calling these actions into question. We have shown that as long as world Jewry continues to support Israelis' policies, they are vulnerable to attack. If on the other hand they are in favor of peace and oppressed to Zionist policies, as they have said, then we should expect them to make declarations clarifying their own stand and position on the matter, and we can present to them these actions, these suicide attacks, as an opportunity for them to move in this direction. That's the end of the quotation. So what can be distilled from this statement is that a good Jew is one who is publicly opposed to Israel and to Zionism. A bad Jew is one who does not take this stance, and this means that silently he supports Israel and Zionism. So the key to the Turkish Jewish community security and its continuation of living in Turkey is to be good Jews. So that's the end of my lecture, and there will be a postscriptum for those of you who are interested how the Israeli apology was perceived in Turkey.
Can you say?
So this postscriptum is the Turkish perception of how the Israeli apology after the Marmara incident in 2010 has been perceived from the Turkish side. And it's graphic, you know. So this is a billboard from the Ankara Metropolitan Municipality. You see on the right-hand side Prime Minister Erdogan smiling, big figure, and Netanyahu, a small figure, dark figure. So the billboard says, "Dear Prime Minister Erdogan, we are grateful to you for making our country proud. Israel apologized to Turkey." So this is a cartoon from another Islamist newspaper. That is the vessel Mavi Marmara, who in 2010 tried to go through the blockade in Gaza, and then the Israeli Defense Forces intervened, and there were 9 Turkish civilians murdered. So that's the perception. So this is the headline of an Islamist newspaper, which is the translation of a Turkish saying, which says, "Be mindful of the rope with which you descend into the pit," which means practically that be mindful with whom you are dancing, with whom you are partnering. And there is now a cartoon which you will see now. So there you have the Jew with the Magen David, a snake, and the Turkish guy in the pit trying to get out of the pit from the snake that the Jew is holding. So this is again this rabid anti-Semitic newspaper which says the spell of Israel is broken, and you see the Magen David shattered there. And there is a cartoon which you can see now more in detail. So this is the state of Israel melting in the sunshine of the Turkish crescent. And 3 yeses from Israel, which was the apology, payment of indemnities, and so on. And there is another cartoon. Here you see the Turkish and Netanyahu. So you can now understand how the perception of Turkey has been on this whole apology situation. And that's the end of my lecture. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. We can open it for Q&A. Haviv.
How widespread, these are really important, interesting quotes, and how widespread are these views, how connected are these views to the current government, to Erdogan, how susceptible is Erdogan to some of these ideas, or the current ruling government?
Well, you have to, first of all, not forget that Erdogan roots comes from the traditional political Islam movement in Turkey, which by definition is rabidly anti-Semitic. But he is a shrewd leader. You have, over the time, we have seen different statements from Erdogan, because he's a very emotional guy, which doesn't have a diplomatical approach and speaks his mind. And when he is angry and speaks his mind, you see that all the prejudice about Jews and Israel just get out, you see. And the latest example was his speech at the UN, where he said Zionism and fascism are crimes against humanity and so on. But he is a shrewd leader, so he knows he and his party and all his followers have split out of the traditionally anti-Semitic political Islam. It doesn't mean that their prejudice have changed, and they know that today, politically correct, you can't be an anti-Semite if you want to be a leader in Turkey and also have a saying in the Middle East. But he believes so, but he doesn't say so. So he is always proactive. When we have problems in Turkey, when there is, let's say, a crisis in Israel with the Palestinian Authority, with Hamas and so on, and this repercutates in the Turkish Islamist press in form of anti-Semitism, Prime Minister Erdogan always comes forward and say, look, the Jews of Turkey which are living in Turkey are our Jews, they have nothing to do with Israel, they are under our protection and so on. That's the approach.
Okay, just a quick, that would seem to be a very positive, compared to the region. You have Malaysian Prime Minister Muhammad, who famously said, in a big speech before 100 world leaders, the Jews control the world, look at how, you know, and he thought he was saying something, you know, very complimentary to the Jews. So if anti-Semitism is not at that level, do you think it's trending that way? Or
well, Erdogan said, for example, that the light bulb was invented by Jews. Jews know how to get to earn money. The best places which are rented in Istanbul are in the hand of Jews, and this he says like a positive thing, you know.
Doron?
Thank you very much for really. I've learned so much. I'm interested in the Donne, that's how I called it, the Donne.
Yes.
So first of all, you know, I don't know. I confess my ignorance that I don't know much about them. I mean, I've heard about their existence. I've talked to the descendant of the Shabtai, but the Donne group. First of all, how many of them are there? Are they targeted as Jews? Are they targeted as pro-Israel, or are they? I mean, after all, they've been Muslims for over 350 years.
Yes.
So the fact that they are still considered a suspect group, I find fascinating.
Yes. Well, the Donne matter was a dormant virus among the Islamist circles until the early 70s, because until the early 70s we had an old generation of leading publicists, newspapers, owners, and so on, who people knew and they confessed that they were of Donne, their forefathers were Donne, but they had nothing to do with the Donne rituals and so on. They were totally assimilated, had nothing to do, but still they were perceived as Donnes. Then this old generation passed away and the virus became again dormant until the last decade. Then you had a few well-known, in Turkey, well-known publicists who started to write what we call best-selling novels because they sold 100,000 copies, where they claimed that, well, you know, this is genuine research and you have all the key positions of Turkey in the hand of Donnes, and then they base themselves on onomastics, you know, the family names and so on. And it is a fact that some family names means that they are Donne families, but doesn't mean that these Donne families today still preserve the rituals and their tradition. There are practically nobody who preserve this tradition and the rituals. They know that their forefathers were Donne, but this is something they wanted to get rid of in the new Turkey, and they got rid of. So we cannot speak of numbers, in fact, today, where we can pinpoint there are so many people of Donne origin. Well, by going through family name, maybe there are 10,000 people, but that's not a community, they are fully assimilated, secular, probably atheist or agnostic Turks.
Sir, could you give this talk in a university in Istanbul? And if you did, what would be the sequelae? What would happen?
I think I can, because I have written the same thing, more or less, I have written in Turkish as well. But let me put it this way. My shield of security of not being attacked, I don't mean on a polemical basis, is that I'm not let's say a columnist, a publicist in Turkey. I do not have a column in a newspaper. So do not have high expectation of Turkey's cultural and intellectual level. Books are sold 500 copies, maybe 1,000 copies. Who reads them is a question mark. Who reads a scholarly book with footnotes and 500 pages, another question mark. People have their intellectual food coming from publicists, newspapers, and the media. I am not there. If I was there and 3 times a month I was writing on this subject, yes, you are right, I couldn't live and survive there. But I am not there, so people knows what I am doing. The Islamists and the anti-Semites knows what I am writing, but they don't care. I mean, I am no name, and no name in the Turkish context.
Yes. What is the size of the current Turkish Jewish community, and how does anti-Semitism permeate itself? For example, are there shuls, are there, bate knesset, are there Hebrew day schools, are people able to study is this going on? Is there a vibrant community of sorts, or is it put down and they have to do everything secretly, for example, similar to how the Iranian Jews have to behave?
It's about 18,000, 20,000 people altogether. Most of them are located in Istanbul, about 2,000 people in Izmir, and a few here and there in Ankara, in Adana, if you will. So we are speaking mainly of Istanbul and Izmir. No, people can go to the synagogues, Jewish kids can go to the Jewish high school. You have cultural societies which are doing their thing in their places, but everything under heavy security by Turkish security, by Turkish police force, by the private Jewish community security force, because we have a track record of 2 synagogue attacks, one in '86 by PLO suicide people, and another recently in 2003, and another one which is, I think, in a way more dramatic, just before the November 2003, in August 2003, a Jewish dentist, a man from the street, was murdered because, and this has not been too much advertised abroad and in Turkey, because this is really a hate crime. The people who murdered them, just strolling in the streets, they saw his name, he was a dentist, it's a Jewish name, okay, let's murder him. And they were caught a few months after when they tried to attack a Freemason lodge. So everything is under heavy control. Meeting dates and place are not advertised in the community newspaper, it's word of the mouth. So as I said, you cannot speak publicly about Zionism. So it's in a way similar to the double life of the Donbass some 100 years ago, or in a way similar to the Iranian Jews, where also Zionism is a demonized ideology.
So I was struck by the slide where you showed that the future for Jews in Turkey was to be a good Jew in the sense of denying, in effect,
yes,
their aspects of Judaism. I think of that particularly, we were just a couple of weeks after Passover, and the Seder ends with next year in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And if a Jew were to say that, according to the material that you presented, that would be a cause for them to be run out of town.
Yes.
And I wonder, in light of that, I mean, it's a very pessimistic view for the future for Jews in Turkey over the next 15 or 20 years. How does the Turkish Jewish community perceive it? Are they looking at this and seeing that there is no future in Turkey and they better be setting up for their children to leave Turkey? Or are they not looking at it in that fashion?
Yeah, I mean, the leadership and most of the families knows about the reality, and the numbers are there. There are more people passing away than new births. So it's a diminishing community. The families prefer to, those who have the means, of course, prefer to send their children here to the United States to have a higher education, because it's the goal. Having a higher education in the United States is the summum of what young kids want, not only from Jewish families, but from Turkish secular families as well. So but the economy is also problematic all over the world. So they will prefer, of course, to have their kids abroad. Israel is not so much, because the problem in Turkey is that it's not really a Zionist community, so Hebrew is not really taught so much. So then you have a language problem, and the young kids are not really idealistic activists and Zionists and so on. So the community is trying just to survive, to maintain its status quo without making too much trouble, and trying to give some sort of Jewish identity to the young generation. They know that it's very difficult, but that's what they can do, that's all.
New York'a hoş geldiniz.
Hoş bulduk, teşekkürler.
To my knowledge, well, you just said that you're not a columnist, so the general population doesn't read your stuff.
No.
There are, to my knowledge, 3 Jewish columnists: Sami Cohen,
Yes.
Gila Ben Mayot,
Yes.
and Sori Ozed.
Right.
How does the general public read their columns.
Well, you have first of all to see what they are writing. Sami Cohen, which is the doyen, and his father was also a journalist. Sami Cohen is a foreign policy analyst. He writes about Turkey, Israel, Middle East, I don't know, whatever it concerns as foreign policy in Turkey. He never touched the subject of anti-Semitism because by definition that's not his agenda. He is a foreign policy analyst, so there are no problems. In the 70s, they were still attacking him and so on, but they thought that he was a dönme because of his name Sami and so on, but he never writes. Gila Ben-Mayor, same story. Gila Ben-Mayor doesn't write about Turkish Jewish things. Even if she writes by belief or faking, I don't know, she criticizes. Soli Özel, which is at the same time a faculty at a university and also a foreign policy analyst in a leading newspaper, used to be extremely critical of Israel. And therefore, the community didn't like him too much, you know. He was extremely on the other side all the time. So, and again, he was always writing on the conflict, not on anti-Semitism and so on. So nobody really touched the subject of anti-Semitism as a columnist, as a Jewish columnist. Those, the Turkish Muslim columnists who touched, are also perceived as either dönmes or on the payroll of the Israelis and so on.
So Willie Cohen is quoted lots of times in the New York Times here.
Yes, yes.
If I may ask a question. So you painted a very interesting sketch of Turkish society vis-a-vis the Jewish community, and you touched on bilateral relations with Turkey and Israel and how it affects the domestic situation. The region is in flux, and Turkey had under the current regime had a very bold foreign affairs agenda. They seem to have been defeated in different areas recently. As the situation in Syria is imploding, and Iranian-Turkish relations seem to be going ebbing and flowing, how does the regional changes or even revolution affect relations or the place of the Jews in Turkey? How does that impact?
Not too much, you know. I think what is of concern to the Turkish Jewish leadership is the infiltration of Al-Qaeda cells in Turkey. I just read in yesterday's papers that they caught a cell of a few people in Thrace with plans to bomb a synagogue, with plans to bomb the American consulate, leading names and so on.
From Syria?
No, these were people who have been trained in Afghanistan, so the police was tracing them. So, but the border is very much in flux, and you have people there, and that's what I think. Not only the Turkish Jews, but also the Turkish government is also fearing about it.
Bruce.
First of all, thank you very much. Very, very interesting. So I had two questions. One concerning history and one looking to the future. On history, I was surprised that you didn't mention the dimitude that the Jews were subject to in the Ottoman Empire. When we talk about the Ottoman Empire's tolerance, it was certainly comparatively tolerant, looked at in the context of other empires from several hundred years ago. But it was tolerant in a way that most Americans would recognize as separate but equal. And Jews were tolerated as long as they knew their place and didn't try to get into the wrong places or the wrong professions or pay equal taxes, which I think is a very good feed-in to the current notion of good Jews versus bad Jews. That a Zionist, by definition, is a Jew who doesn't know his place. And I was wondering if you think that there are roots there and whether there's more to say about that. In terms of looking to the future, I guess I wonder whether you think that Erdogan is a model for something that you will see replicated more and more throughout Europe, where essentially he is the first leader we've seen in a long time who has tried to lead sort of the ending of the taboo against anti-Semitism. We've certainly seen Western leaders who are elitist anti-Semites, and we've seen populist anti-Semitic movements. But for the past 50 or 60 years, we really haven't seen this sort of synergy between a leader promoting populist anti-Semitism?
Well, I haven't mentioned Dimitri because it's, I mostly focused on the contemporary and Republican period. But the concept of Dimitri is still, in a way, still valid in the Turkish society. For the man in the street, a Turk means a Muslim. It doesn't inflict to his mind citizenship. It means Muslim, and therefore a non-Muslim, a Christian or a Jew, cannot be a Turk, and thus should not aspire to higher government position, for example. I mean, there have been many polls in the past where people have been asked, can you accept to have a non-Muslim in the National Intelligence Organization, and so on and so forth, and of course the answer was no, no, no, no. So the social memory and the government's perception are that they are not real Turks, despite all the rhetoric of Turk. Regarding Erdogan, I couldn't understand, I didn't hear very well what you were speaking, so can you please repeat me in a nutshell what you are asking about Erdogan and anti-Semitism?
Sure. One of the things that Erdogan has done is that he's reduced, if not removed, the taboo on anti-Semitism.
Reduced?
Turkish culture.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you think that that's...
I don't think he reduced the level of anti-Semitism in Turkish culture. Well, if...
You said the taboo of anti-Semitism.
The taboo of anti-Semitism.
Or against that?
I don't think so, because Erdogan did not admit, if I understood correctly your question, Erdogan is not admitting that there is anti-Semitism in Turkey. The times when he is stepping in and trying to protect the local Jews is because of the local Jewish leadership making representation to him and saying, okay, please intervene and see what these people are speaking about. And quite to the contrary, I think that is the first time in the Turkish Republican history that prolific anti-Semitic writers have been accepted as public intellectuals, not by the Turkish society, but by the Prime Ministry and by the Presidency of Turkey. These papers that I have shown you, Akit, Vakit, and so on, the reporters of these papers are among the presidential entourage which accompanies the president and the prime ministers at trips abroad. Nowadays we have, we are trying to find a peaceful solution to the Kurdish problem, and the prime ministry has selected 63 people, wise persons, they call it wise persons, who will spread the word among the Turkish intellectual and so on, for finding a peaceful solution to the Kurdish problem. So among these 63 wise persons, you have two leading anti-Semitic writers of the Vakit newspapers. So the real problem in Turkey for me is not the existence of anti-Semitism, you have it everywhere in the world. The real problem is the acknowledgement that this is normal, you know, they are not anti-Semites, they are intellectuals and so on. That's the routinization of anti-Semitism.
The gentleman in the hat, you had a question?
I was just trying to look into the history and note that the actual reason the Ottoman Empire came down was because the Padishah were trying to westernize the military and all the culture, and the Caliphate was opposing him. And they actually instituted many revolutions of the Janissaries and all those things. And I think that in the context of the real reason why the Ottoman Empire came down is because of this power struggle between the Padishah and the Muslim leaders.
Yes, and then you had in the Balkans and so on all these nationalist movements. You had the Turkey losing the World War I war and so on. So the abolition of the caliphate was of course never a Jewish plot, but and these two personalities were in fact not, let's say, instrumental or had any sort of influence, but the hate is so deep among these Islamists, and the ignorance is so deep that it geometrically perpetuates itself. You know, all the time you hear the same stories that this is some sort of linear agenda, starting with Herzl's refusals and ending up with Atatürk.
The woman in the back.
Maybe naive, but I mean, the Turks have still not acknowledged the Armenian genocide. That's one very enormous statue to their recognition of truth. But also the Mavi Marmara was, it seems to me, that was an aggressive act against Israel, proceeding against Israel's barriers, and for Israel to apologize. I know it seems naive, but for them to offer money to accommodate the Turks' notion of somehow their wrongness, I can't square it with recognition of truth or history or every nation's sanctity and their border sanctity. How can people, intellectuals more or less, not recognize that they were invading Israel, Israel's territorial waters?
Yes, you are right, and I agree with you. And there are people who agree with this point of view as well in Turkey, but they cannot speak loudly, you know, they cannot say so loudly. We have a regime which is, regardless of the Mavi Marmara problem, which is oppressive and which doesn't, we have a sort of a new sultan who just want to hear what please him. So when it comes to Mavi Marmara, there is a consensus among the Turkish society that, well, this was an aggressive act from the Israelis, and nobody really looks into the problems that, well, yes, the Israeli consul general, the Israeli ambassador in Turkey warned repeatedly that don't go. I mean, there is a clear line, and still they provoked the case, but today nobody can say so, you know.
And the money?
And,
how can that money?
well, that's real politics, because the apology and the money is, I think, from the point of view of the state of Israel, they are trying to restore somehow the old relationship with the hopes that they could again be allies in this turmoil of the Middle East.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I just want to, I was just at a conference on the West Coast where we looked at how states, weakening states and failed states are contributing to the rise of radical Islam and Islamist social movements. Turkey, in the last 10 years, I believe the economy has done very well.
Yes.
So why are the Islamists gaining power when the economy and society is developing rapidly compared to other societies where Islamists are coming in and the economy and the states are crumbling?
There are several reasons. The secular governments that we had before were corrupted. Then the Islamists had a heavy, widespread and in-depth network of giving away what we call aid money in form of food, in form of coal and so on, you know, social aids. And most of the municipalities were and are still in their hands, which have huge means of doing this. And we have a prime minister, and we have to admit it, which is, from the Turkish point of view, extremely charismatic, down to earth. The guy in the street identified himself with him and is proud of him, and we didn't have such charismatic leaders in the past, you know. That's why. We have a new Turkish conservative Islamist bourgeoisie which is doing well with the new economy.
The gentleman.
You were discussing on that page where you were talking about how the liberals are not critical of the Islamists, and there were two questions that sort of came to my mind. The first one was that you were talking about the democratization, and currently the AKP has more than a majority of the Turkish legislature, and they've had that in the previous elections as well. Don't they see that as a threat to the democratization of Turkey because it's effectively becoming a one-party state again? Mm-hmm. And the second question I had was, they see Israel as a colonialist, imperialist state, but the current position of Erdogan is to create a modern Ottoman Empire, which is itself a very colonialist and imperialist notion. So how do they keep squaring the circle on these two big issues?
For the first one, yes, today the liberal and leftist have problems. You know, their position was supporting AKP. Today they are somehow reducing their support, but they are very grateful to the present government for one basic thing, of having repressed and put into prison all the generals and the Turkish armed forces. That's the first time in the Turkish history where the Turkish armed forces have been so heavily stricken by an Islamist government. So all these liberals and leftists, as I said during my lecture, had their own personal agenda because of their past. They were put into prison by the army in the 1980 military coup. So they are grateful to the present government, maybe just because of this. But still have second thought today when they are seeing that the government is transforming itself into a one-party system. Yes, Erdogan has his own utopic idea of renewing the Ottoman state in the Middle East, but he also has his own not well-hidden antipathy toward Israel, and therefore the two can go together.
If this is real, or like this is a part of the politics of Turkey, that he's trying to get away from Israel so he can really associate himself to the Arab world to really recreate the Ottoman Empire idea that he has in his agenda.
No, I don't. Can you repeat the question?
Your question, if I understood correctly, is that is Erdogan genuinely interested in to renew relation with Israel, or is he trying to? Yeah.
What I'm saying is.
Can you speak louder, please? Louder.
Is it possible that Erdogan is trying to really get away from Israel?
From Israel to renew relations with the Arab countries.
Strengthen the relationship, and this is a policy of America and Israel and Turkey, because really America is looking for a leadership, democratic leadership, which is Turkey, and Israel and Turkey, they should work together. So this is like a view to really strengthen
Even during the previous governments, secular governments and Kemalist, Turkey always was, it is not very feeling comfortable in its relationship with Israel and the other countries, because Turkey always wanted to have a relationship with Israel, but at the same time, because of his being a Muslim country, to have the same relations, political and trade relations with the Arab countries. So I don't think that he is trying to get away from Israel. The problem with him is that his personality, his ideology and religious belief and so on, makes his mind, which is an anti-Israeli and anti-Jewish mind. But he's a pragmatic. He knows that he may need maybe Israel's support here in the States if the Armenian genocide problem becomes again a problem, or the trade is good between two countries and so on. So he is playing in both ways, still having a distant relationship with Israel, but having a good relation with the Arab state as well.
Okay, this will be the last question.
Well, I find it very strange.
Can you speak loud so they can
I
hear?
find it very strange that the Turks trying to break the Israeli naval blockade of Gaza occurred a few weeks after gas was discovered in the Mediterranean, and a treaty was signed with Cyprus, which would have left the Turks out. And I heard a lecture by an Israeli economist lately that there was this controversy. He didn't touch on it politically, but there was a question of how was the money was going to be divided. And evidently the North Sea oil, the UK kept 80% of the revenue. And then it was the lecture I've heard, this was maybe 2 months ago, is that the Israelis agreed to take 30% of the revenue. And as you realize that there was this big noise about Gaza, and you thought war was going to break out, and all of a sudden everything just quieted down We don't hear anything about it anymore. So I'm just wondering if it's related to the gas issue.
I don't think so. It's a local issue. The organization, the NGO who sponsored this Mavi Marmara trip is an Islamist organization. Not very big, but an Islamist organization. And the present government main grassroots are Islamists. So there were even talks that about 50 MPs from the Turkish parliament were going to go together with the vessel, and at the last moment they just stepped out. So in the Turkish context, you couldn't have a government which would say no to the Mavi Marmara going there, because it was a common cause for everybody.
Okay, so on that note, Rifat, thank you very much for a wonderful. Thank you all.